we have some slides, and we are good to go. So, Cherry, I'm going to have you'll talk a bit about your background as we get into this. So, how you got into carving and how you stumbled into carving and how you got to where you're at today, because that's I think quite an inspiring journey for that. I'm going to spotlight you and just sort of highlight. So why don't you start with that, with your background on carving, and then we'll jump into the slideshows in a few minutes.
Okay. How I get into carving? Well, I had to tell you, I blame my brother for it all. He lives nearby, but for many years he was a snowbird going from the Northwest down to Arizona for the winter months. And in one of the places where he lived, there was a small carving group. And he came home one winter for the holidays, and I was sitting by him while he was carving on his project. And as he was carving, and my head went closer and closer, looking intently at what he was doing. And he finally looked at me and he says, "You want to try?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Okay." He says, "Now this is a knife and this is a gouge." And I said, "Okay, what do I do with them?" He said, "Well, you take the knife and you make a straight cut. That's called a stop cut. All right. And then you take the gouge," and he showed me how he did it and how it went up to his stop cut and a little clicking sound. And I thought that was kind of cool. So he said, "Here, try it." So he hands me the knife and I said, "Which way is which?" He says, "Well, you hold it this way." And I said, "Okay." He said, "I'll make a cut." So I made a cut. Then he handed me the gouge and I said, "Which is the top and which is the bottom?" And he looked at me like, "Oh, dumb woman." Anyway, he showed me how to do it and hold it. And I gave my first cut. And when that gouge hit that stop cut, I was totally hooked. Then that stinker, he left the project he was working on with me, and he left me 2 or 3 little tools, and he went back to Arizona. And there I was with my unknown what I was supposed to be doing, but he did leave me a picture of what the end project should look like. And so I spent several months teaching myself how to carve with my 3 little tools and using that picture as my guide. It was fun, but I realized that I had a talent that I didn't know that I had, and that's been very exciting. It took about 2 years before I found a article in the local paper that came out from the county. And in there, I found that there was a carving group in Milwaukee. So after 2, 3 weeks getting courage, I went over to that group. And I have to tell you, I cannot express enough the significance of joining a local group so that you can be a part and have that whole wonderful feeling of being included in and supported as you learn how to carve. They've been great, and I really appreciate what they've done. While I've been there, I continue to do the type of carving that I thought everyone did. And to my surprise, I found that nobody did what I did. So I continued on, and I wanted to go on and not just do big stuff, but very intricate. I like tiny detail. And so I have pursued that to the point where now I feel very comfortable in sharing with you the process that I have learned. There you go.
And how long ago was it that your brother hooked you?
It's been about 6 years.
And did you have a crafty, arty background before that,
No,
or?
I've never had an art class in my life. I can't even draw a very good stick man. But what I found I could do is I can take some graphite and I can copy onto a wood with a pattern. So that's the way I do it. I don't know
Okay.
anything about colors or wax or chalk or anything like that as far as any formal training. It's all been what I've learned by practicing.
Okay. We're going to look at some examples. I'm going to switch to the PowerPoint slides. We have some slides that show a range of options that of the work that she's produced, and we will take a look. And here we go. So we're not going to have Sherry talk about these. There's about 10 of them or so. And it just kind of gives a range of, mostly they're the deep relief pierced, but there are also examples of spoons. And I think the vessels, you can talk about those later. I think you said those were turned by a friend. But I think it's quite an interesting range of that. This particular piece was been featured. It was in Gathering of the Guilds 2 years ago, and this was the promotion, one of the promotional pieces for the Gathering of the Guilds that was highlighted. I think is the kind of the poster child. We'll talk more about these. These pieces, if you notice, they are held with one piece, one attachment point, not two. And they're different, a couple different sizes. I got them at face on and angled. And you'll see some with stained glass, some with no glass, some with mirrors on the back. And Cherry will talk about that. These to me are impressive in the sense of the painting coloration of the fish itself. And this is the last one of that sequence. So we're now going to switch into a series of these slides that Sherry put together, and she'll talk through the process. So that's all yours, Sherry.
Okay, thank you. What I'm showing you is what I thought everyone did that I found out that no one else does. So it was quite a surprise to me in the carving field that no one did this type of work. By this, I mean the deep relief and the piercing and the use of glass in the background. When I first started doing this, it was more of a larger pieces, but nothing very delicate. And I wanted, because I like detail, I wanted to be as delicate as I could. So the way I do it is I choose my wood, and you can see this has a live edge. And the first thing I do is I outline where I think the frame of the picture will be. And then I select two contact points where I want my object to attach to the frame. You'll notice I have one in the lower left and then one on the upper right-hand side by one of the flowers. We'll get the next slide. Once I put the picture on there, I then cut out using my scroll saw and take away all the material that's in the background that's not associated with the object that I'm carving. So what I'm wanting to do is just show the flowers and the hummingbird and nothing else. So that's what's the next step. Go ahead, the next slide. Oh, go back again. Go back to the other one, back to 2. When I did this and got to this point, the question I had is, how can I stabilize this very delicate pattern and not break it? And that was a real concern to me because I have done larger items that had a lot of attachments that was quite secure as far as to the frame. So that question was, how am I going to do this? And to be honest with you, I had no idea. So that night I went to bed and I really thought about what can I do? And the thought came to me, those of you who are in woodworking know that you make jigs for all kinds of things to hold or to do repetitive work. And I thought, well, what I needed was some kind of a jig that I could put in here and hold the object still while I carved. But the question was, how do I do this? I had no idea. So I went to bed that night, and just before falling asleep, I said, Lord, I need some help. I don't know how to do this. And the thought came to me, it says, well, it's right in front of you. And I thought, what's in front of me? I have absolutely no idea. So go to the next slide. So the next morning I got up and I was having my cup of coffee at my carving area, and there it was right in front of me. All the pieces that I took out when I did my scroll work was sitting right there. And when I put them together, there was the perfect jig for my object. I thought that was pretty cool. Go to the next slide. The problem with this was it was still an inch thick. How am I going to get down lower the jig low so I could carve? Well, then the thought came to me, well, cut it in half. So I went to the bandsaw and I took that 1 inch, each of those 1 inch pieces, and cut them in half. Go ahead to the next slide. Again, the pieces, I cut them in half. So now I had two 1/2 inch pieces of the puzzle. Now, when you go to the next slide, when you see what I did with that, I put those pieces again around the object that I'm carving, and you can see how it's indented in, and it's great. They fit perfectly. Now, go to the next slide. Now, when you take that and you try to put all the pieces in, and you grab any piece of there in that picture, and they're just as solid as can be. If you do this, my recommendation would be that you would cut those big pieces into smaller sections. So therefore you can take some out while you're carving an area and still have the remainder of it protected by all those pieces. Okay, next step.
Do you ever,
Yes.
question, do you ever break any of the pieces putting them in or taking them out? Is that a fragile
It is
process?
fragile. It is fragile, and you have to be very careful in putting them in. Sometimes rather than put them in from the front side, I'll put them in from the back side. And I don't know why, but it always seems to be easier to do it that way.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
Is it always basswood?
I have done primarily basswood. I have done some other wood, but I prefer bass, probably because
Okay.
that's what I've been used to.
Okay.
But it works in other woods as well.
Yeah.
Okay, when I get to this point, I flip it over, go on to the next slide, and I tape all that jig into place. Now you notice right now that you'll all see blue tape on the side. I tape the raw edge of the wood so it doesn't break apart. So you'll see lots of blue. Once this is done, I flip it back again. And by the way, I do a lot of flipping of the objects when I'm carving them. And so this blue tape holding that jig in place is really important, not only for when I'm flipping to do my carving, but also when I transport it or when I store it, I don't have to worry about it falling apart. Because if anything falls out, then you can lose your whole carving. And I don't like to use glue. I like to maintain the integrity of the object.
So
Go ahead.
the pieces that you're putting back in for support are they're half the thickness, so they would fall away from the blue tape. How do you make them stick to the blue tape?
Okay, let's go to the next slide and I'll show you. It's a very busy slide, but I take it and I push those pieces down into the tape, and so they will stick very easily.
Okay. So this slide is showing carvings. You got a lot of shavings there. Is that what we're looking at?
What I'm looking at now, what you're looking at is once I got that jig secured and I'm back onto the front of my carving, now it's a time to carve. And I don't like any of my carving to be right on top of the wood. I want it in the wood. So the first thing I do is take the whole object of my end product, and I take it down to about 1/4 of an inch. That's why you see that whole mess of shavings. Once I take that out, then I can start to shape each of the items. For example, the flower blossoms, I can tilt them one way or the other so I can start getting an idea of what my end project will look like. Once I do that, then I redraw the entire object. So I'll redraw all the flowers and the hummingbird so I know exactly what's going to look like. Okay, let's go to
Are you drawing freehand or using a pattern?
I'm doing freehand at this time. I
Yeah.
have, however, and sometimes I've cut out the piece that I want to be quite detailed, and I'll put it on the top of it and then draw over it with graphite. But mostly it's done freehand.
Okay, let's get a picture of where you're going with this. You start with a 1 inch piece of wood,
Yes,
and then you're now taking off the top 1/4 inch to
yes,
lower that. And then presumably then from the backside, you'll eventually take off more. How thick is the
yes,
resulting,
yes.
about how thick is the resulting
Oh, you mean the object
object?
that I'm carving?
Yeah,
It's quite thin when I get through, but I'll show you that as we progress here.
okay.
So let's go to the next slide. Now this is the back, and you'll notice that what I've done here is I have pushed my jig forward. Okay. Now, once I've carved the back side or the front side, now I'm at the back, and I still want this thing to be stable while I'm taking what I call taking off the back. I'm sure there must be a more formal name, but that's the word I use. So I push my jig forward. And here's a point I like to make in terms of the jig. Sometimes I'll do a 50-50, just cut those jigs in half. Sometimes I'll do a 60-40 or some other version of percentages of one versus the other. And the reason I do that is if I have a real deep carving, when I push my jig forward to take off the back, I still need to support it. So you may need more depth of your jig, but that will come with experience and knowing what your pattern is. Okay, once I have flipped it over, I'm on the back side of my carving. Now I will do the exact same thing as I did on the front. Only this time when I draw the line around on the wood around it, that's going to be the inset for the glass that I'm going to put in there. So I want to take that inset down just the depth of the glass. That it could be a 1/4 inch or so, depending what glass you buy. But at this point, once I've drawn my lines to identify my inset, now I go to the carving itself. I took off a 1/4 inch on the front before I started carving my design. Now I'm going to take off sufficient wood off the object that will take me down to the depth of the glass, plus go another amount of space.
Oop,
So here on this next slide, what you're seeing, oh, go back.
my problem, sorry.
Now go forward one to
Okay,
number one. So what I've done now, you can see I have taken the back off of all those items that I have carved. And if you look at the very top up there where there's 3 little flowers, if you look carefully, you'll note that they're curved on the edge. So I try to make those petals very thin on the edge. I mean, really thin. I do the same thing with the wings on the bird, as well as the branches. So they become very, very thin in the process. So it may be a 1/4 inch thick, the object, when I get through. It is quite thin and it is fragile. Any questions so far?
not in the chat, but I'll go back one.
Okay.
In this picture, there are 2 entry holes for the scroll saw.
Yes.
So
That's where
you're
I drill the
doing,
hole to do my sawing. Yes.
so those of us that have played around with scroll saw, and this is a fairly detailed scroll saw operation. You're doing this in 2 halves, really, right?
Okay.
And what kind of blade do you use, and how long does it take you to do the scroll sawing?
Oh, what kind of a blade? I order my blades from the wooden teddy bear, and I get a real fine blade so I can do real detailed stuff. I'm not sure the number on that. I want to say 14, but I'm not sure off the top of my head. I have to look it up.
But you're getting some very tight turns in these
Yes,
pieces, right?
yes, I do.
I mean, really, really tight curves.
Yeah, you look down there on the bottom, on the right-hand side, you see there's a bud, and above that's a little branch that comes out, and then above on that branch is another little bud that's coming up, and they're pretty tiny. They're pretty tiny.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But also on
Um,
the picture too, Larry, if you go back, that's go back, yeah, that shows only 2 pieces on my jig. I will usually take this and make probably 4 pieces out of it. And that's so I can take some out while I'm carving an area, and then I can put it back in to protect my object while I'm carving on something else. To have the one whole side taken out is pretty risky when you're doing a lot of detail. So I like to have those pieces that I can put in and out as I need to protect the object, because I don't want breakage.
But are you cutting originally is a two pieces, and then you cut
Yes,
the 2 pieces up?
yes.
Yeah,
And I cut those pieces into smaller pieces. Yes,
yeah. But you start with the 2 pieces at the
yes,
beginning.
yes.
Yeah.
Because once I make that drill hole and I put my blade in there and I start cutting, I go until I can't cut anymore. And that usually, in this case, I start at the bottom and I go all the way around the bird and flowers on top and out to the point where I'm attached to the framework again. So that's all one big piece.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, let's go on. So we're doing the back. And then when you clean that all up and you take the jig out, that's what the back of the carving looks like. And you can see that really they're quite thin all the way around, and you handle with care. But that's the back side. What we want to look at is now is the front side. That's the front. That was a completion of the carving that I did before I flipped it over to take the back off. At this point, now it's ready for color. And I will frequently put the jig back in place to give it just a little bit of support while I'm adding color, because as I mentioned, these branches, they're all pretty fragile. Then
At what point do you cut the recess for the stained glass? In these pictures, you haven't cut them yet.
Flip it back to the previous slide, slide number 12. Now that I've got the inside done, at this point, I'll do the inset for the glass.
Do you have the glass in hand first before you
I do
cut
not.
that?
I have the same, I use the same size glass on all of mine. So I have a couple of small pieces that I use to gauge it by. So I do it by hand. I do not use a router. It's all done by hand. And so I can take it down to the depth that I need. And it's very important that I have that little piece of glass, because as I go up that carving, I want to make sure that none of the carving that I have hits the glass. So I may have to take more off of the carving to give the glass in that space. The whole notion of the glass back there is that when you run your hand across the back of that carving from the wood onto the glass and back onto the wood again, you don't feel any sharp edges from the glass. It's as smooth across there as can be. So it's very important that that glass is inset sufficiently so you have that smooth transition.
Are you going to talk more about the glass process?
Yes, I can. Let's go on to the front side.
Okay.
Because I like looking at the front and not the back.
Yeah.
Once I have the color that I want on my objects, I take that whole carving, protected in the front and back with cardboard, down to my glass shop. And the reason I do that, because I think I want a blue background, but there are 14 different colors of blue. Some have designs in it, some of them don't, some of them are plain, some of them are pretty, some of them are dark. And I want to put that glass behind the object to the one that I think best shows off the object. And so I bring that to, and I look until I find the right glass. Sometimes that takes me 2 different stores to find the right glass, but that's important.
Are you cutting a glass to fit?
Yes, I have learned to cut my own glass. And when I cut my own glass, I usually use, when I have it to the size that I want it, I usually use the 1500 or 2000 sandpaper grit to sharpen, or not, to sand off the edges of the glass so no one gets cut with that sharp glass. And then when I put the glass in, I use E600 for my affixatant. E6000, pardon me. That's the tube that I use to hold it in place.
That's kind of a silicone adhesive. Is that
Yes,
how
it is.
I
It is.
recall?
Yeah, E6000 is an affixant, and you can buy it at any store. It's everywhere, but it's
Hmm.
really, really solid, and it will not, glass will not come out if you do it correctly.
Hmm. Okay.
Okay,
Yeah.
now,
Next.
next
Oh,
slide. You have it colored, you've got glass behind it, and then we go to slide 14, and there's your end project.
with
And
backlighting.
when you put a backlighting behind it, it's really is a three-dimensional object. They're gorgeous, I'll have to admit that. And they look like they're just standing there all by themselves, free floating in that piece of wood. It only has the two attachments, and so we handle it carefully, but it's still quite solid, and I like them.
Do you ever use three attachments or
Yeah.
one attachment or four attachments? I mean,
Yes, on that first one you showed of the bird, it has three attachments: the bottom of the weed, or the reeds, I should say, and then I think two other, yeah, two reeds are attached, and I think that's it. And sometimes there's a
yeah.
third one. So it depending on what it is as to the attachments, but the fewer attachments, the better I like it. The salmon is held in place only by its tail. So that is just one attachment. And then you have to, when I work on the salmon, I got to make sure that it's balanced correctly, that it doesn't, the weight of the salmon doesn't cause friction on that attachment point. So it depends on what I'm carving as to how many attached points I do.
Yeah. And how many, do you ever break them? What happens if something breaks?
If I break an object, I have three options. I can change the pattern, and I have done that. I can glue it, but that's not my pleasure. I don't care to do that because to me it's not whole then. So I tend not to glue. Or the third option I have is that it becomes very fancy wood for my wood stove.
Hmm. And is your success rate getting better as you get experience?
Oh my goodness, yes. I
Yeah.
rarely have fractures anymore. You can, when you're doing delicate stuff, you can know when it has you're reaching a point of no return. You can feel it in the wood. So you learn to pull back.
Yeah. Yeah. Jeff was observed. One of the attendees is saying I'm getting a lot of echo, and this is a challenge on any Zoom and any speaker. So, Sherry, your microphone, my guess is it's somewhere, and as you move your head back and forth, you're probably getting a little bit of echo.
Oh,
I was experiencing that earlier when I put my AirPods on, and now I don't have any. So it also might be their computer. So it's a challenge.
I'll try to be still.
No, no. Well, it's hard to coach with. Um, Patrick, and you asked what kind of carving tools do you use?
Mine are all hand tools. I think, well, I think I have one here. Most of mine are flex cut. Um, yeah, flex cut is what I use. That's because my brother left me three little flex cuts, and I assumed that's what you had to buy, so that's what I bought. And
Yeah,
I still stayed with them, and I've been very pleased with them as long as I can keep them sharp.
yeah. That's actually a good lead-in question to the next slide, which is your workstation and how you work and where you work and how all this is done. So this is a picture of what you want to describe what your setup, because this is in the space you're in right now, right?
Thank you. Yes, I have a little three-bedroom house, and that is where I live. And the room that you're looking at is my, I guess you'd call it a bedroom, it was, and then it's an office. And now I have my desk, and across from my desk is this workstation that my brother-in-law made for me. It's an interesting workstation in that well, you're seeing that carving of the bear, that's at an angle, and I can tilt that angle at any direction that I wish. and to make it more comfortable for me. But also where you see the my fan back there to get all this carving dust out of there, that stand remains flat as I move my carving an angle, change the angle. It's a really a neat deal. And then on the left there, my brother-in-law, bless his heart, also made me a stand for all my carving tools. And I have them all set in order so I know exactly where each tool is. And so when I want my detail knife, I can reach over and grab it without having to look. But that's my basic carving area is right there in my house, across from my desk and my computer.
And I noticed a mask on top of the dust collector.
Yes.
Do you wear that often or infrequently?
Anytime I'm doing a lot of sanding, I turn it on. If I'm doing sanding, really deep sanding, I will put the mask on as well, only because I'm very careful about my lungs. I like to keep them for a long time. And so far, we're happy with each other. And it's very important to me to have preventive health. So, yes, I use that mask a lot when I'm sanding. Not so much when I'm carving, but primarily when I'm sanding. And I am a person who loves to sand. And I've always feel that I can carve, but unless I sand it, I don't know what I'm looking at. So I'll carve for a while, then I'll sand. Then I carve for a while, then I sand more. So I use that mask a lot.
And what we don't see, as I recall, there's a shop vac underneath or nearby. So
Yes,
you're vacuuming up
yes,
debris as you go along, kind of a
yes.
thing.
I have a small Sears shop vac, just a tiny little guy, but man, it works great. So between that and the dust collector, I do a pretty good job in keeping it fairly clean around here. Otherwise, it
Does the
looks like
du-
Hansel and Gretel when I'm going through the house.
um, do you find dust layering around that room?
No,
Is
no. It's my rule of thumb to myself that when I finish the day, I clean up where I am. So it doesn't settle much because I try to clean it up every day.
okay. And then the question came in from Jenny. She's asked, does the grit from the sanding damage your carving tools?
Well, I'm sure it does. Uh, just logically speaking, I would say yes, it would. Those who have been carving a long time and know wood, you could probably answer the question better than I.
Do you
But
find yourself
you'll notice
the
there's a paintbrush right there. And usually when I'm sanding, I'll brush it off so that I can see what I'm looking at. And then as I finish sanding, I brush it again and I can get my vacuum cleaner out if I have a whole lot of sanding. But I'm very careful on that to make sure that's clean when I start with my knives again.
yeah, and Jenny asked a follow-up question. Do you have to sharpen more frequently? Do you find yourself, and how do you sharpen and resharpen?
Oh, sharpening is always a challenge to me. You up on the right hand side there, you see my honing board and my green, and so it's always right there. And then below that, you see my sharpening stone, fine on one side and a little bit a heavier one on the other side. So I use frequently. I try to always sharpen them before I put them away when I'm finished my carving, whether that be a long day or a half a day or whatever.
Yeah, and Clark asked us sanding. So, what sanding tools do you use on those delicate pieces?
I like to do it by hand rather than anything else. I do have the pencil sandings and I use them a lot, but I try to do it by hand with my Mirka, and I find that works the best for me because I know how the sanding feels, the material, because I've used them so much. They're very soft and pliable, so I can get them around things easily. But between the Mirka and my pencils sanding chip, that's what I use.
And when you're sanding, you are the jig is in place, I assume,
Yes, yes.
right? Is there any time when you're sanding without the jig in place?
You know, I hadn't thought of that, but I think I'd probably say no.
Mm,
Again, it depends on the fragility of the object that I'm carving. The one that you saw there with hummingbird and the flowers, I would have the jig in place because that can snap so easily, and I'm aware of that. So I try to keep those jigs in place as much as possible. And that's where if I
yeah,
change it from a 50-50 to a 40-60 when I'm cutting them in half, that comes in handy that way.
yeah. And Joe asked the question, do you use published patterns or do you have a reference for patterns?
The patterns that I use, what you see there on that bear, that pattern comes from a uh, a magazine that a friend of mine had. He's an outdoor person and a hunter, and I found this picture of this bear and I thought it was pretty cool. So I made a copy of it, and from that I made a pattern. So a lot of my patterns come from pictures that I've taken or pictures that I found in magazines or wherever, and I have enlarged or uh, altered that to my liking. So I started out with a pattern book, but I rarely use that anymore.
Yeah. And where do you buy your wood?
Most of my wood I have purchased through the shows that I've gone to, and that's been an excellent source. I have attempted to try buying wood at some of the wood stores around, but if I want kind of what I want, it's usually too narrow. I want a wider wood. And so if I go to a wood show, carving show, you could find some wood there. So I stock up when I'm there. Now that we are
And
looking at with that bear, I thought I'd be really smart because I was in Hobby Lobby one day and I was looking at their wood section and there was this beautiful round piece with a live edge. And I thought, oh, that is great. And I looked at it and it said the right word. It was the right kind of wood. But let me tell you, it's like carving in cement. I would, because it's cross grain for one thing, so it makes it very difficult. So watch your wood when you buy it, is what I would say.
yeah. And you're talking about coastal carvers in Lincoln City and the Salem show primarily, or are there other shows?
That's primarily that. Uh-huh. And then
Okay.
of course at Astoria, I bought some wood over there. And when I was in Boise, I at their artist show, I bought wood from them. And so you find them everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And do you ever use power tools
I
and
have a
power
Dremel.
carving tools?
No, I have a Dremel and I do use it periodically, but not very often. I'm primarily into my hand tools.
Okay. Oop, I just switched you, so sorry. Let's talk about finishing.
Yes. What would you like to know?
How do you do it?
I use two methods. I use pastel chalk and I use BriWax. The pastel chalk, I don't know if you can see this or not. I will attempt to turn this down. This is I went to an art store and said I wanted to, one of the gentlemen at my carving group said, Cherry, you need to learn how to use pastel chalks. And I said, okay. And I believed him. So I went down and I went to the store and I said, I want to use chalk on my wood carvings. And they looked at me like I was from outer space. I don't know anything about that. So I said, okay, what do you have in chalk? So she showed me this little box and I bought it because it has all kinds of beautiful colors in it. And I thought, ooh, fun. So I bought this, took it home, and tried to understand how I could use this in putting color on my carvings. And it really works great. Let me show you how I do it. If I took a color, this color here, I have one of my tools, my carving tool, and I use it just for chalk, nothing else, and I shave it. I'll take a small amount and I'll just shave the edge of it until I have powder there. I understand you can buy powdered chalk, and that's fine if you want to do that. But I have these, so I learn these. And what I have learned to do is if I take uh, a stiff brush and I poke it in there and I use a stippling process and put it on my wood, and I can add more and more as much as I want till I get the color that I want. And then I can pull it out and make it as thin a color as I want it to be. If I put any moisture on this, it turns it very dark, almost as if you're using an acrylic. And I like the idea of the thinness and the petiteness of using this process. So it's a matter of shaving, using the stipple process like so, and then pulling it out to the color that I want. And that's how I do that. On that salmon that you saw, I started off with white on the bottom, then I added gray to the white, and that's what's so neat about the chalk. I can put colors on top of colors till I get a color that I like. And on the salmon, I added gray, and I used gray and white for a while, and then I started to add black to it until I got a darker color clear to the top of the salmon. And then when I went to the tail of the salmon, it was just pure black. But you can do that with chalk. So you can make any type of color you want and put it together. It's really cool. It's fun too. So that's how I use chalk, artist
Are
chalk,
you
color
are
on it.
you applying this with the jig in place?
Yes, I am. Because when I start putting down onto that wood, like I'm doing right now, that jiggles that form. And you better have it protected while you're doing that. Now, once I do the chalk, then I have it finished the way I like it. Then I take something like this, it's called a fixative, and I spray it, and that will hold your colors in place. And that's how I do the chalk.
Yeah. So can you back up a step and you
Yes,
clean the you're applying the chalk to raw wood, is that right?
yes, I am.
And how do you clean the pencil marks off and dirt and anything else before you actually do that, or do you
By the
clean it?
time by the time I have finished carving the object, be it a flower or a bird or whatever it happens to be, there should be no pencil marks. And by the time I added all my sandings, I usually sand down to a 400 before I'd even think about doing any coloring. So there should be no pencil marks, no dirt, no nothing on those petals or on the bird.
And do you vacuum before you do that? At the end, very end, do you blowing
Just,
dust off
just
or
before I start my coloring process, I wipe it clean. Yes, usually with a cloth and a paintbrush, a clean paintbrush. And then I add my colors. And when
do
I
you
finish,
try?
go ahead.
Oh, how do you? So you have no art background, no painting
No,
background,
no,
and you just spent a lot of time carving these things.
yes.
Are you practicing on paper ahead of time to get the colors, or are you just going for it and putting it right on the wood?
Well, you notice this is a piece of scrap wood from what I've cut out on something else. So I'll take scrap wood and I'll play with the colors till I find the colors that I want and how I did it. Then I do it on my object.
And is there a paint eraser for chalk? How do you fix mistakes, or do you?
When it's there, it's there.
Yeah.
And when I put the fixative on it, it is there. You're not going to change it. So that's why I practice on a piece of wood before I go to my actual final product.
Yeah. Are there any questions about the pastel pastel process at all? So dry stippling with
Your eyes, yes,
powdered chalk.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, then I'll put
Yeah.
this.
So we switch to oils.
I use a product called BriWax. Why do I use BriWax? Because my brother used it and he showed me this is what I should use, so therefore I use it. Have I tried other wax? No, I have not. Why haven't I? Because I've been so pleased with what I can do with the BriWax. Uh, I called the company because I was interested in asking a couple of questions about the wax. And he says, well, what do you do with it? And I says, well, I melt it down and then I add some mineral spirits to it to thin it so it won't coagulate. And I combine different colors of wax to get the color that I want. And he says, I never heard of such a thing. So they don't recommend it. They didn't know anything about it, but I have continued to do the process, use it with great success. So therefore I'm continuing to use it. There's three main colors that I use. One is clear, one is the dark brown, and the light brown. And the dark brown and the light brown, they're different intensities of color. And what I have found is I can mix the two. And if I can't find the right thing, I can always thin it out with the clear. And it's amazing the different variations and tones you can get with three colors. And that's primarily what I have stayed with all these last 6-7 years. How I do that, I'm going to turn the camera here a little bit. I want to show you my little tool that I use. Originally, this was a little pot that you use to put your potpourri in and melt it, and it makes the house smell very nice. But since I needed something to do what I'm doing here, I found that that one light bulb underneath there, you can see it, is sufficient to melt this wax. And it works great. So I put my wax in there. I add my mineral spirits. And then I'm ready to go to work. Okay, so then I'm just going to show you one little step that I take. I enjoy working with free bark on the side. But what I also know that the more I handle this bark, the more it's going to break. And so the first thing I do when I have something like this, when I'm going to be using, is that I will seal the live edge with clear wax. Now my wax, I've been sitting there for a while and it's gotten kind of evaporated. So I'm gonna add some more wax. There we go. And when you add the wax and then you add that mineral spirits to it, it's just like waxing with a clear liquid. And you can just take it and you can paint it on. So I paint my live edge front and back with this wax. It will seal it nicely. I mean, very nice. And it will hold all of your pieces in place. You'll notice on those slides you saw that I had put blue tape on it in addition to the waxing. And I do that just as a precautionary, because when you're handling it a lot, they can flake off very easily. But the process for doing any type of coloring with this BriWax is the same. I melt it, I put it in and I'm using this little guy here as an example. If you note the feathers, what I did was I melted the wax, that brown, right up, get my fingers going the right way. Here, I put it dark here. Then I took my paintbrush and I just started pulling it forward, and I pulled it as far as I could go to get the color that I liked. And you can do that very easily when it's either dry wax or if you melt it and do the same thing. If you use melted wax, you got to be sure to put sufficient mineral spirits in there to keep it thin so you can brush it out. And you can get all kinds of variation and of tones with that process. It really works out very well.
And are you mixing the chalk with the waxing on every piece?
No. Oh yes, I can use wax and chalk on the same piece. When I finish,
so go back to the eagle for a minute. There's white on a lot of it, and there's some little pink on the leg,
Yes.
on the, or the flowers, I
Here,
guess.
the
Yeah.
pink here, that is chalk. This is chalk. This is wax. This over here is wax, and so is this.
So once the wax is down, you can't put chalk on top of it, I assume.
I have never attempted to do that, so I can't answer
No.
the question.
So you're just careful about that, right?
I'm careful about that. Yes.
Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to show you one other thing. If I can go back to the chalk again. And I'm going to bring my little donkey out here. You can take gray and black and white, and you can get all kinds of variation and of colors within using both of those on top of each other. So I can put down a layer of gray, then I can take white and start, stipulating in there and brushing it out with my brush and get all these different colors. And it really is nice because when you get all through, it looks like, wow, that's a good looking donkey. It looks pretty real. But again,
Yeah.
that's using chalk.
And Cherry, I'm going to suggest what I do. I'm going to go back to the
Yes.
samples that we did,
Yes.
and I'm going to walk through some of those. Maybe ask you to comment on a few. I think we're back. So the ducks in this scene, would you say those are wax or chalk or a mixture?
This is wax all the way through.
All the way.
You can see the feathers in there if you look really careful, that they're all individual feathers that I've carved into it. But yes, this is all wax. And I have taken the light brown and then I diluted it with the clear to get the the head is lighter, and you'll see some of the feathers on different layers are lighter. That's where I've taken that same color of brown and diluted it with clear to make it lighter. The areas where it's really dark, that's a dark brown. And I've lightened it a little bit because it was too dark, and I got it a little bit lighter. Then on the feathers where you see is a secondary color of brown, and then the tips are really dark. That's a combination of both the light and a dark brown. So it's a variety of things you do to make it different, but yet you're using the same things. And on this one, you see the 2 points that hold this bird in place is at the base and the tip of that grass. Otherwise, he's just sitting there all by himself, floating in the sky.
Do you ever carve more than one instance of a design?
Say that again.
Is this the only time this particular duck scene was done, or did you carve
Oh.
multiples of them?
If someone I have an account on Instagram, and it's just a holding place for things I have done. And if people look at it and they say, oh, I like that bird, would you carve me one? I'll say yes. And it's interesting. It may be the same bird, but they always look different. And if I change the color of glass in the background, it changes it dramatically. So everyone is different, but yet it's the same.
I'm gonna switch on. So these floral designs, I assume, are all chalk. Is that right?
Yes, they are. They are chalk.
And is the frame wax?
Yes, it is.
And what about this one?
This one is this is a combination of chalk and the wax again. The basket itself is wax. The flowers and the green are chalk.
Yeah. And this is you have a mirror instead of stained glass.
Yeah,
What is your experience with mirrors?
this is the first time I've tried mirror rather than glass, and I really like it. It just changes it dramatically because you can see that in order with the mirror, you can see the back of your carving. So I had to paint the back of the carving as well as I did the front, at least around the edges. So when you look at that, the mirror picks up the backside and makes you think there's more back there. It really turned out cool.
Yeah. And you talked about the fish.
Yeah. The salmon on the left, I mentioned I started out with the white chalk, and then I started to add gray, and you can see the scales through there. And then as I got higher up on the fish, I added black, and to the point that I thought it looked like the picture that I was using as my template. And then when it came to the fins and the tail, that's just straight black. And again, that's all chalk. And once you
Yeah.
put the chalk on, then I put the black dots on there because salmons have to have that. Then I sprayed it with the fixative, and it is not going to go anywhere. It's there. It really is fixed permanently. This,
And this one,
go ahead.
no, all natural. What is this?
This is basswood, of course, and I sanded it down to 400. Then I just put a clear wax on it. And by the way, when you put wax on it, even like on this bird or any of the others, as soon as the wax dries, I usually wait 24 hours or 12 hours. And then I can take a soft cloth, like an old t-shirt, and I can buff it, and then the shine comes out. Sails on a ship, I use just, 400 sandpaper will bring that BriWax and make it look really white. And then when I put a clear BriWax on top of that, and then I polish it when it's dry, it's just as shiny and pretty as can be. I think you have
Is it?
that last
And
step.
is the jig in place while you're doing that buffing?
No, usually not, because see, I have the glass behind it already, and I am just putting my finger behind it and holding it in place while I do the buffing.
Okay. And the eagle is a
It's
mixture.
wax, it's a mixture again.
Yeah. And these guys, the
Uh,
elk and the window
elk,
scene.
the elk is wax. The window scene is wax. That window scene is interesting, and I carved the whole background with the window in place. That was fun.
Mm.
I like this guy. The question I see down there is scales on the salmon. No, I use a tool that I put those scales on with. They're not drawn on. I've been told I should learn how to use a wood burner, but I haven't learned that yet. This is one of my first carvings. I'm surprised you even took a picture of it because it's one of my first carvings, and that is all wax. And here's the one I was telling you, the sails, when I sanded it down to 400 and then put that clear wax on it and it dried, and you buff it and you can see the shine that comes on it. And when there's light behind that, it's really glorious. But that's
And
all.
how did you get the white sails?
Sanded it down, using it down to a 400 grit. And then it's really, really smooth. And the more you sand BriWax, basswood, the whiter it gets. And then I just added clear wax to the top of it.
Wow, interesting. Let's see, I lost track. So the question was, do you use the wax top coat? Hmm. Patrick, I'm not sure. I guess the question is, do you use the wax to top coat the chalk?
No,
Do you put no?
not well. It depends. If I want a matted look, no, I don't. If I want a shiny look, then yes, I'll put a clear top coat on it. But I don't do that too often.
But will the wax be the top coat, or will it be something
It was
else?
once I put the chalk down and I put a fixative on it, that chalk is now permanent. So when I put, and it's a matte color, when I put a clear wax on top of it, then I can polish it.
Okay. Okay. I'm gonna have you switch the camera back to your face unless you have something else to demonstrate.
Oh, I think that's.
Yeah, and there we are. So some of these pictures I took were in the background in Sherry's office. I guess they're mostly out of view now, but what you're looking at is her shop, right? This is your office
That's my
slash workspace slash this is where you spend a large part of your time, right?
yes.
Yeah. Um, do men like different things than women in terms of what they
Oh,
buy?
men like the manly stuff. They like ships and they like animals, fish, country scenes, that kind of stuff. Women
Yeah.
like flowers.
Okay. Okay. Well, that is the end of the show. This is not necessarily the end of the conversation, but this is the end of the slide. So unless there's any more questions, we will kind of rapidly approach kind of the end process. How much time, you spend a lot of time carving in a week, is that right?
Do I? Well,
Yeah.
my routine in the morning, if you know how, want to know how I do it, I get up usually between around 6 o'clock and I get my little dish of oatmeal, my cup of coffee, and I go sit at my desk and I do my morning devotions. And then I do a quarter of a turn. And goodness gracious, there's my carving table right there. So if I have a project going, it's still sitting there from the day before, and I can pick up my knives and start doing my thing. And I can carve for an hour, maybe 2 hours. Then I stop, and then there's always lots of things to do around the house. And I can start and stop during the day, but primarily in the morning is when I do my carving.
And on Wednesdays, you go to Milwaukee Carvers,
Oh, absolutely.
right?
That's invalid. You don't mess with my mornings, Wednesday morning. I go to carving group. I
And
call it my
that's
therapy session.
8:30, 11:30. What kind of time frame?
Yes.
Yeah.
8 to 11. Yeah.
8 to 11. Yeah. And that's a group of about maybe 15 people typically,
15,
10
20
people.
people. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And mostly doing their own things, but
Everybody does their own thing and a huge variety of objects, lots of caricatures, people doing sceneries, you name it, they do it. Several gentlemen work on masks, Native American mask or Native American objects. And so there's a wide variety. And I think I'm the only one who does what I do. So it makes it kind of fun.
yeah, it is. And we're Jeff Osborne is on the Zoom call today. I don't see him, but Jeff is lives in Sherwood and uh, not Sherwood, um, Newburgh, and he wants to start a carving group out there. So I'm working with him to start that up, and we'll do some introductory classes. There's a group that's been meeting in Beaverton for a long time that Nancy Gerard has been coordinating and teaching at. There's Jerry Boone here. Jerry, you might comment on not. There's a small group that meets in Forest Grove. Um, and there's a group in Vancouver that's been meeting for 20 years, I think, roughly, at what they call the Kingsway Carvers. They meet at the Kingsway High School. They have access to the art room that was set up there,
That's
and
fun.
it's really quite amazing. So carving happens in lots of different places. I might have forgotten some. From time that there also had been a group in Tigard, and we're going to try to get that restarted by teaching these introductory classes. Tom Rich started up a group called the Eastside Carving Gathering that meets the first Saturday once a month at Morningside or Morning Star Retirement Home, 31st and Sandy. The name and address is in the newsletter always, and Clark Moss is on the call on the Zoom, and Clark is the co-leader of the carving special interest group that meets the Thursday nights, third Thursday in Multnomah Village, and then we do a daytime version at Rockford on the first Wednesday. So lots of different pieces of activities, trying to get the monthly thing going, and then maybe every twice a month, and then every week. So we'll see how that actually works. Jerry, Boone, do you have any comment about Forest Grove? Put Jerry on the spot, but you're muted, Jerry.
Yeah, there's, maybe 4 or 5 of us get together on Tuesdays between basically 10 o'clock and around noon or so at the Forest Grove Senior Center. Most of us are former students of Jeff Harness. So, and we do a little bit of everything, quite a bit of bark carving, couple of Christmas decorations usually every week, and I do mostly relief carving. But it's a real informal group, and sometimes there's only 2 of us there, and sometimes we get 6 or 7. It just sort of depends upon what everybody else has got going on that day.
Yeah. And in Mesa, what is your routine in Arizona? Once a week, twice a week?
I'm in an RV resort here, and we meet twice a week, Tuesdays and Thursday mornings from basically 9 o'clock to about noon, and sort of depending upon the season, what time of the season. Like this morning, there were only a couple of us that showed up, but last Thursday we had 7. So, it depends upon whether it conflicts with all the other activities down here. For some reason, there's people that prefer golf to carving. I don't quite understand. I've never been a golfer, but they make their decisions.
Yeah.
I don't have to agree.
Yeah. Thanks. And Jenny asked, where in Milwaukee? I think Terry answered, but it's in the Milwaukee Center, Milwaukee Senior Center. Right off the major freeway there, but easy to get to. And Jerry asked to get the brand and description of the scroll saw blades that you use. So if you could drop me an email afterwards, maybe the size of the blades and maybe your source. You mentioned the source.
Yeah,
I'll put
the wooden teddy bear.
Yeah. Yeah, I'll put that out as a group. We don't have a handout this time, but what I will do is we always post a recording on the YouTube channel, and then when we have PowerPoint slides like we have here, I'll also post those on the website, a link to them, and so you can look at the slides again if you want. And particularly for people that are looking at this afterwards, you can sometimes get better pictures than on the PowerPoint than on the slides, than on the Zoom recording. And unless my eyes glossed over, I think I got all the questions. Thanks for the chat. And thank you, Roman, for showing up. Roman's a regular with our Monday morning conversations. Let me highlight that. Roman is an inspiration.
Oh, look at that one.
So he's a technology guy. So this little rotating thing he made, he's a terrific resource. And if you want to comment about what those are, Roman, feel free to do that. He likes to carve small things.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's amazing what people carve.
Yeah. Tiny.
I like that one.
Yeah.
These are 1.5 inch long, carved from basswood and finished with oil. Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. I think that's it. Thank you all for joining. We'll take off in December. Nobody ever shows up for anything we do in December. I usually end up talking to myself. So we don't do December. We also don't do the summer for the same reason. People do have other lives. We tend not to do everything in carving. Cherry, thank you very much for the time you put into tonight and for the preparation you did this. Cherry has done this version of this presentation a couple different times, and she's getting more complete all the time. So I think we're gonna have the definitive recording of that. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for those outside the Portland area for joining us and for being a part of that. So appreciate that. Good night, all. Thank you very much. Thanks.